Temperature and moisture control in your mid-century house is one of those topics that might not seem that exciting or relevant to you until suddenly it does. And a mid-century house has so much potential to be snug and comfortable, but after 75 years, sometimes they can need a tune-up, and more often than not, changes made in the last 20, 10, or 5 years can create problems that didn't exist in the first place. So before you make any major changes to the insulation or moisture air seal of your house, make sure you've thought about all of the considerations and make sure that you're getting independent assessments rather than taking the word of one particular type of subcontractor who's pitching their specific services to you. Be on the lookout for trendy aesthetic improvements that may actually end up creating temperature and moisture problems in your house. For example, both painting your brick or re-siding your house in vinyl can dramatically alter the way that air moves through, into, and out of your house and can trap moisture inside the thermal envelope of your building. In the case of painted brick, this can result in just poor effectiveness. Moisture stuck on the inside of the paint layer can cause the brick to spall, that means pieces of it crack off, or to bubble and the paint layer to fail, which will eventually look crummier than it did in the first place, even if you didn't like the color. Rewrapping the house in vinyl is a little bit just like plastic wrapping the building, and you can trap moisture layer inside your wall systems at some point where the warm, moist air inside your house works its way out to the cool air barrier in the winter. It's getting trapped instead of moving out, and you can get secret mold forming inside your walls, which can add up to a major health issue over time if not properly addressed. In an ideal world, you avoid making choices like that and then having to deal with the consequences afterwards by simply not making them. Mid-century homeowners specifically need to think about temperature and moisture control in their buildings because these houses were built in a time when we were really transitioning from an era when we had less control over specifically our humidity and our moisture in buildings and not that much control over the temperature inside of buildings. We were just more willing as people to accept a certain level of discomfort that went with seasons to an era when we had a great deal of control. Going forward into the 70s, we actually took that way too far and sealed ourselves into buildings so much that we created problems that are known today as sick building syndrome. Basically, trapping ourselves inside a hermetically sealed bubble, assuming that air conditioning was going to take care of our temperature and thermal control. Assuming that air conditioning would fix all of our humidity and temperature issues, and then locking ourselves in with a bunch of off-gassing chemical products that were just making our buildings toxic on the inside. That's obviously the wrong direction. But we may want more ability to control that it's warm in the winter and cool in the summer than our mid-century forebears had. We may have added air conditioning to a mid-century building that never had it, or upgraded from a swamp cooling system to AC. We may be less likely to do things like put on storm windows and more likely to replace earlier, less well-insulated windows with new, modern, more insulated windows. So as we make changes like that, we need to make sure that we're thinking about not just the control of temperature in our buildings, but also the control of moisture. Rather than giving you one particular answer telling you the right way to create the right insulation and air barrier around your mid-century home, I'm going to give you some general thermodynamic principles of buildings to consider. This is because not every mid-century home is the same. For example, if your house is a classic mid-century ranch with a gable roof, you'll insulate it differently than if your house has an internal structure, a post and beam, and the final layer of your roof is interior ceiling on one side, some amount of insulation and structure in the middle, and exterior right outside of it. That is what's known as a warm roof. If you have an attic that has insulation in it, that's what's known as a cool roof, and both situations require different solutions for controlling your temperature and moisture. The most important concept to think about whenever you're adding insulation or air seal to your building is that warm air holds more moisture than cold air. So anytime warm, moist air hits a cold surface, it's going to drop that moisture on the cold surface and condense. In an ideal world, there's no condensation happening anywhere inside of our buildings. To prevent that from happening, that means we need an air barrier somewhere before the air goes from warm to cool enough to want to drop its moisture. We're actually going to deal with avoiding moisture issues with several different strategies. The first one is to control the temperature of the air and or the surfaces inside your house. So you might be warming or cooling the house strategically to avoid that condensation pattern. The second one is to mechanically dehumidify the air inside the house so that it's not carrying as much moisture to drop. And then the third method is to circulate air throughout the house. Air movement is a good preventative to moisture condensation and that moisture condensation turning into mildew or mold. Most mid-century houses don't inherently have a lot of water issues. If your house is relatively unremodeled over the last 70 years and has never had a moisture problem, odds are it doesn't have one now. But if you're going to make any changes to siding, insulation, or air seal, think about them carefully to make sure you're not going to create a problem that didn't exist before. And if you are creating changes that might have a problem, try to mitigate the problem that could come up. Try to prevent that problem from spiraling out of control by heating or cooling the interior air appropriately, dehumidifying it appropriately, and keeping air moving throughout the house. Midwestern basements are an example of a place where condensation and humidity can be a big problem in the summer. So the easiest answer is just to mechanically dehumidify. Get a little dehumidifier unit or two, set it on a sensor so that it's running whenever the air is above a certain humidity level, and rather than having it drain into a bucket, arrange a little hose so it drips directly to the foredrain. Problem mostly solved. But you also might want to think about creating better insulation along your foundation walls, and also allowing for air circulation. I'm a big believer in having a subfloor that's elevated slightly off the basement slab so that there is room. If there's ever any condensation or any seepage of moisture coming in through the basement floor, it has a way to move away from finished surfaces rather than feeling trapped with still air and moist surfaces. That's your recipe for mold formation. I had to demo and replace all of the walls in my own basement, which had been finished in the 1960s when I moved in because there wasn't any air circulation and there wasn't proper moisture control, so mold had been building up behind the walls. Similarly, if you find that there is condensation or moisture forming along your ceiling area in cold weather, that might be something that you can do an air seal check and increase or be strategic about the insulation you've got going on in your attic. Whenever you're feeling thwarted by getting conflicting advice by different subcontractors who are each recommending their own particular product and service, it's a good time to step back and get an independent opinion. This might be calling up and getting a new building inspection or paying for an energy audit to think about where you could improve both the insulation and the air seal of your building in strategic ways. If you've been actively dealing with temperature and moisture issues in your mid-century house, you might want to first look at any changes that were made to the house in the last few decades. It might have been that there was no moisture issue going backwards, and it's a new thing that has started when the house was resided in vinyl. I talk a lot more about some of the complexities of this and also the history of thermal comfort in buildings and the general philosophy of thermodynamics and the way that air and moisture move through our mid-century homes in the accompanying podcast episode that's linked below this video. Go check that out. And when in doubt, when you're making changes to one part of your house, either for aesthetic reasons like considering painting your brick, please don't, or changing up the type of siding you have, make sure that you're thinking system-wide about how moisture as well as temperature is going to change inside or outside of your house. Hey there, I'm Della Hansman, architect and mid-century house enthusiast. If you're looking for more information on how to make good choices for your mid-century home, how to tailor or transform it to fit your modern life, you'll find what you need elsewhere on this YouTube channel, or check out the podcast Midmod Remodel, or head over to the Midmod Midwest website to learn more about making smart choices for mid-century homes.